Today I'll show you the 3 most common reasons you are crashing low at 2 AM. There's a very specific fear in type 1 diabetes, and I vividly remember the first time I fell asleep alone in my house, staring at the ceiling and whispering good luck to myself, genuinely not 100% certain that I would wake up the next morning. Now, waking up at 2 AM to a screaming alarm, sculling a juice box and ruining your energy for the next day is infuriating. But I'm guessing that unfortunately, if you're watching this video, you probably know that feeling all too well. But it doesn't have to be your new normal. So today I'll show you the 3 most common reasons you are crashing low at 2 AM, ruining your good night's sleep and draining yourself of energy. More importantly, stay until the end and I'll give you the clean slate protocol, the exact testing method to find out if your basal insulin is actually the villain here, so you can finally get a good night's sleep with confidence. A quick reminder here that I'm a coach, I'm not your doctor, so this is for educational purposes. Consult your own medical team before making changes to your insulin strategies. The first culprit we want to look at actually has nothing to do with your basal insulin. It's checking and looking at what you had for dinner. This is the first thing I do with my clients because it can be a surprising reason that you're dropping low. Meals that are high in fat and protein, like pizza, steak, or takeaways, are really slow to digest. So the carbohydrates in those meals can take hours to actually show up properly in your bloodstream. This leads to a pattern which you might be familiar with, which I like to call the false flat. You check your glucose monitor, or your CGM, a few hours after eating, maybe just before bed, and you see a nice flat, steady line. Maybe a little peak and then it came back down, but you're kind of sitting between 6 or 7 or whatever your normal is, and you assume that your dinner and insulin boluses work perfectly, so you head off to bed. Then, maybe it's just before bed or as you're asleep, you get this skyrocketing high blood sugar. So the food finally hit your stomach. It's that delayed digestion, and around midnight you spike with your blood sugars. You wake up high, you get super frustrated, which is understandable, so you take this huge correction bolus, maybe it's a rage bolus, of rapid acting insulin. This unfortunately takes a little bit of time. Although it's rapid, it's not immediate. So now 2, maybe 3 hours later after you saw that high and that correction starts to do its work and you have a 2 AM crash because you've overcorrected that high blood sugar. We're on this roller coaster of blood sugars. It starts hitting its maximum strength around that 2 AM. So exactly when you want to be deep asleep, you're waking up to treat a low blood sugar with an average tasting juice box right at 2 AM. In this scenario, your basal insulin might actually be fine. We have no clue because your dinner bolus timing was wrong or not enough, and that is muddying the waters. But if your blood sugars can't be explained by this roller coaster scenario because you had a nice, normal, regular, low-fat dinner or regular fat dinner, we might need to go further back and have a look at exercise and what you did in the afternoon. That leads us to culprit number 2, which is exercise-induced sensitivity. This can be a common blind spot that I see with a lot of my clients when we're reviewing their overnight data. When you do a heavy workout in the late afternoon or evening, you empty the stored glucose inside your muscles. They all have their own little batteries, and when you deplete those, they need to be replenished. So for the next 12 to 24 hours, your muscles start to pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream to refill those storages and the batteries for next time that they need to do effort. Because your muscles are now clearing glucose on their own, your standard overnight basal insulin is suddenly too much for your body to handle. So this is what we talk about when we're saying you're more sensitive for a prolonged period after exercising. This is why your blood sugars might stay super flat and perfectly stable overnight on a Sunday rest day where you didn't do any more strenuous exercise than you normally would, but can crash at around 2 or 3 AM after you've had a heavy Monday gym leg session, for example. What compounds this is that if you're not on board with the managing of your blood sugars during exercise, you could have had a spike after a heavy session, then you've overcorrected, then we add the sensitivity, and then you go down. We can plan all this and we can work around all this, but your overnight insulin was correct for your rest day, but too high for your training day. If we rule out both food and exercise though, that's when we really start to get a fine look at your basal insulin and what might be going on wrong there. Culprit number 3 is the actual basal rate. We often jump to this too quickly before we've ruled out the other options, but you can't blame your basal rate until you have completely eliminated the impact of food and exercise, so we have a clean slate and we're looking at the basal to correct. It's important to remember that your basal insulin has exactly one job. It's to keep your blood sugars nice and flat when you're fasting or resting. It's not meant to fix highs after meals or to counteract exercise drops. If you're not on a pump and you're using injections, it can be increasingly hard here. So if you do not take that late night correction dose and you did not exercise that afternoon, only then can you actually conclude what your basal rate is doing. Is it set too high? Is it set too low? There is a danger here though, that we start to play a bit of a guessing game. If you lower your overnight basal rates on one bad night caused by food, because you had takeaway and you're on that roller coaster, and you might end up waking up at 15 in the future nights for the rest of the week. So we need to run a clean test here. To prove that your basal is too high or too low without ruining your blood sugars for the whole week, you must test on a night where there's no active food or high fat food and you've just done a regular amount of exercise for you, not the day you started training for a marathon, for example. To properly test your basal, yes, we need to eliminate the variables of 1 or 2 that we talked about with exercise and high fat meals, but you can't just skip dinner and hope for the best. You need to systematically remove the variables by setting up what I call a clean slate window. Wash out the noise of the complex meals is one, and then exercise is another, so we can actually start to see your basal insulin is doing in the background. That's why I made the Quiet Night Basal guide. It is a full video guide that gives you the step-by-step checklist you need to run a clean and safe overnight testing period for your basal, and it takes you all the way from sitting down from dinner and planning dinner through to analysing your data the next day, interpreting and looking at probably one of the 4 basal patterns you're likely to see on your CGM the next morning after a test. If you map this correctly and you're able to run a safe basal test, you'll regain the confidence to actually sleep and wake up with energy. If you ignore it and you keep doing what you're doing, you'll probably just be buying more juice boxes and waking up exhausted every day before your day even gets started. The Quiet Night Basal guide is completely free. It touches a bit more in detail on some of the things we've had here. Click the link in the description to access the video and let's get you sleeping safely throughout the entire night. See you in the next video.